I thought. A beguiling head of broccoli who can cook, with connections to a global criminal organization. I think I'm in love. A panic attack. Degree in political science with a minor in economics. Check. 1 year of French immersion at l'Université Laval, Quebec. Check. Strategic move to Ottawa to pursue a career in external affairs or international development. My field of interest. Check. Write external affairs entry exam. Check. Pass exam but fail to get accepted into external affairs. Check. Become despondent, drink heavily. Check. Call up friends, go to neighborhood pub, the Royal Oak, and commiserate over beer. Check. I don't know, dude. I thought you were a shoo-in, said Steve. The degree, the French, the passable English, not to mention the new wave hair. You're such a bureaucratic catch. And doesn't your dad work for the feds? Aren't you genetically part of the machine? Yeah, but he's with Consumer and Corporate Affairs in Vancouver, I replied. My pedigree is a bit thin for the boys at external. And it's not the hair, it was an exam, not an interview. I love Steve and all my pals from our little garage band, the Simple Tones. Steve is our bass player. We're joined tonight by Ted, drums, Adam, vocals, Bridget, more vocals, and Andrew, vocals and mystical inspiration. Everyone is blessed with a good sense of humor. The Newcastle is flowing, but I'm not buying rounds for obvious reasons. The odds were not in your favor, George, chimed in Adam. As I understand it, over 3,000 write the exam annually, 300 pass, and 30 get jobs. You had a 1% chance of becoming a foreign service officer. I trusted Adam's stats and take on this process, as he, unlike myself, was from bureaucratic royalty. Yeah, I guess I can console myself with being in the top 10%, I replied. They let me know that I'd passed the exam, but that makes it worse in a way, as I was obviously weeded out. What hurts is that the two guys I share my place with both landed jobs with external. Neville has a master's in international studies, and Bill has a solid work history designed for a job in external. He was an air cadet and rose up the ranks, so he knows how to take orders. Yeah, but you know how to take orders too, George, said Ted. Didn't you tell us you used to be a keg waiter? Everybody laughed uproariously, myself included, and I raised up my glass. Hi, my name's George, and I'll be your foreign service officer tonight. We clinked our glasses and guzzled our beer. One consolation was the delicious array of brews at the Royal Oak. Patty, the waitress, came over to our table to see if we needed more drinks. Always, came the unanimous reply. And Adam's buying, I said, because he's got connections. My largesse has a certain shelf life, replied Adam. As does your large ass, countered Steve. And who's picking up the tab for your food and rent? Adam parried. Not to mention my guitar strings, I laughed. Maybe you should go back to slinging steak and lobster, buddy, said Ted. What else are you going to do with a poli-sci degree? And a minor in economics, I overrode. By now we were all giddy with beer, laughter, and camaraderie. What the hell can you do with a BA in this country, I queried. It really doesn't prepare you for much. It doesn't confer any marketable skills. It conferred the use of the word confer, said Andrew. Good one. You're probably good at researching and writing and working to some kind of deadline. Yeah, I guess, I said, as I reflected on what exactly I'd taken away from 4 years of higher education. I saw a posting recently for communications officers with Consumer and Corporate Affairs, said Bridget. Looked like some kind of job writing with the UFFI Center in Hull. What in God's name is the UFI Center, I quivered. I think it stands for urea formaldehyde foam insulation. Some kind of government program that needs splaining by eager young recruits like you, she grinned. Ugh, sounds hellish, I said. Where do I find these things, these postings to which you refer? I asked. They're on the board at the Government Employment Office down in Gloucester, she replied. Go check it out. Sounds like the beginning of a dead-end Kafkaesque bureaucratic nightmare, I said. What's the pay? 26,000, replied Bridget. I hesitated. And benefits, she added. Sign me up, I enthused, slapping my hand on the table. I'll go and check it out tomorrow. But until then, why don't we head over to the Preston Lounge and rock out? The Preston Lounge was our jamming studio, situated in the basement of an automotive garage on Preston Street, just a few blocks away from the Royal Oak pub. All heads nodded in agreement. Beers were down, bills were paid, and we got up to leave. I turned to Steve. You got the London dock? I asked. Wouldn't even think of jamming without getting a little tuned up, he replied. The next morning, not too early as I was nursing my usual post-jam hangover, I wandered down to the employment office to scan the corkboards with their myriad of job postings. Fisheries Administration? No. Atomic Energy Agency Technician? No. Canada Agriculture and Food Museum Curator? Please, God, shoot me now. There were dozens and dozens of postings and over 100 different government agencies to choose from. My morning after condition made sorting, picking, and choosing grindingly painful. Okay, focus. Here we go. Consumer and Corporate Affairs, Eufy Center. Communications Officer, Place du Portage, Hull. Queries and resumes to Roger Gauthier, Human Resources Department. Got it. I wrote it all down on one of the little notepads provided and wandered out in search of coffee and breakfast and coffee. Perhaps I got the interview because I was seen as somewhat of a novelty. Not many university grads were making the move from the West Coast to Ottawa due to the horrible winters and demands of bilingualism. Or there's a remote possibility that my father's position as a regional director of CNCA in Vancouver conferred some loyalty or perception of familiarity with the department and its ways. However, the path was paved. I wandered into Roger's office on a hot summer day in 1981, wearing dress pants, shirt, and tie, and my Harris tweed jacket, my only nice officey attire, to a cloud of smoke and coughing. Sitting at his desk, obscured by a haze of tobacco smoke, behind an ashtray full of butts, sat Roger Gauthier, the morbidly obese, chain-smoking head of HR for the Eufy Center. Staff population of about 120. Come in, have a seat, he said in perfect, heavily accented English. These were the days of unabashed smoking. Very few restrictions were in place, and if you wanted to smoke, you could, so he did. The interview went well. Roger was a very cordial and affable guy, and before long, the interview turned more into a conversation about ourselves, including Roger, sharing a bit about himself. I love my food, he said, and wine. I consider myself to be somewhat of a gourmand, but you know, my doctor, he continued. My doctor says, Roger, you have high blood pressure and cholesterol. If you don't cut back on your lifestyle, you'll be dead in 6 months. Ha ha, he chortled. But I told him, I'm not going to quit. I'm enjoying life too much. I'm not going to give up my rich food. Cough, cough, cough. Long drawn cigarette exhale. I nodded politely, smiled, laughed at the appropriate moments, and agreed with everything Roger said. Despite my oxygen deprivation and sweaty Harris tweed hyperthermia, I got the job and started the following week. Urea formaldehyde foam insulation was, for many in the 1970s, a godsend. If you had an older, uninsulated residential or commercial property, Eufy could be injected into the hollow, uninsulated wall cavity of your home, helping to greatly reduce heating costs during the 70s energy crisis. It was such a great thing that the federal government gave people $5,000 grants to help cover the cost of installation. All good. Then came the discovery that Eufy often didn't cure properly on the many wall cavities, leading to moisture, mold, mildew, and off-gassing of formaldehyde, a potentially carcinogenic gas. It was banned in 1980, and it subsequently became a requirement of property sales to sign a declaration that Eufy either was or wasn't in the home. This left thousands of homeowners fearful of the possible cancer-causing monster living in their walls, and with the inability to sell their homes unless at vastly reduced rates. All bad. Enter the federal government once again with the creation of the Eufy Center to save the day. $20,000 grants would flow. Technical expertise would be hired. Teams of specialists would show up, dressed head to toe in protective gear, to remove the nasty Eufy. And most importantly, a communications department would be created with talented writers to act as explainers and apologists for the vast volume of letters that began to flow from the 57,000 Canadians affected by this fiasco, asking, "What the fuck is going on?" It was in this department that I found myself, with a half a dozen other communications officers, an assistant manager, and a manager, all overseen by a director, and we were but one cog in the larger Ministry of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, headed up by the Honourable Minister Judy Arola. An office in a department in a centre within a ministry. Hello, Franz, can I help you? It was the days of onion skin, carbon paper, and IBM Selectrics. Letters came in. If they lacked urgency, they would be stuck in a yellow folder. If urgent, a red sticky tag would be attached. If it was intergovernmental or ministerial correspondence, the urgency would require a red folder with several red sticky tags. I know what you're thinking. How incredibly fascinating. Tell me more. Luckily, I worked with a lively and fun group of people, which made most days pass with good-natured banter and pleasant exchanges. But it didn't take long for the repetitive, dead-end nature of this job to set in. I lived for after work, the Royal Oak, and my little new wave group, the Simple Tones, and my new girlfriend, Stephanie. Stephanie and I met at a Halloween party, where she showed up dressed like a head of broccoli, and I came as David Bowie, disguised as the Elephant Man. That was his Broadway stage breakthrough phase. Stephanie's broccoli outfit was fetchingly cute, and when I took the bag off Joseph Merrick's disfigured head, revealing my painstakingly made-up Bowie impersonation, replete with the Aladdin Sane facial lightning bolt, we connected, and it was relationship on. In short order, we were doing what young couples in their mid-20s and the early 80s do. Stephanie had recently moved back to Ottawa from Paris, where she was training to be a chef at the Le Cordon Bleu. She was also working with a lawyer in Boston, seeking exoneration for her junior role in an international drug smuggling ring, which had recently been nabbed in Canada's largest ever hashish bust. I thought. A beguiling head of broccoli who could cook, with connections to a global criminal organization. I think I'm in love. Given her background, is it any wonder that she would fall for a guy with a fascinating career as an information officer with the UV Center like myself? I thought I knew coffee, but I was wrong. The coffee that I had a relationship with since that first cup at youth hostels during my hitchhiking trip across Canada at the age of 17 was pedestrian fare compared to what Stephanie brought into my life from Paris. My coffee was a tin of Maxwell House, or MJB, ground up God knows when, left on a shelf, percolated, and kept warming on a stove for hours, or days. It was bottomless cups served at diners by affable waitresses wandering around with glass, Bun-O-Matic coffee pots. Stephanie brought fresh ground beans and sexy machines, whipping up hot milk into lattes and cappuccinos, or served small, hot, black, and muscular in the form of kick-ass espressos. It was, for a coffee junkie like myself, caffeine heaven. Excuse me. During the hot Ottawa summer months, to get a little exercise, I would ride my bike from my place at Bank Street and Macleod through downtown Ottawa, over the Eddy Street or Partage Bridge, into Hull, about a 20-minute ride to my cubicle at Place du Portage, buzzing on one or two of Stephanie's double espressos. On just such a day, roughly 6 months after I started working at the UV Center, I arrived at our communications office, caffeinated and a little sweaty, only to find my coworkers standing around, coffees in hand, looking a little somber and engaged in a buzz of quiet conversation. Heads turned as I walked in, and Michelle, our communications department director, said breathlessly, "Oh, good morning, George. You probably haven't heard yet, but Roger Gauthier died last night." "Oh, no," I replied, taken aback. "What happened?" "I was having dinner with friends at Le Coq d'Or in the Byward Market last night and suffered a massive heart attack," came the reply. Well, I thought, at least he died doing what he loved. Everybody liked Roger, and as is so often the case when someone familiar to us dies, we must pause and discuss. Questions, concerns, and speculation flow. Did he have family? Did he die right in the restaurant, or did they get him to the hospital? Did he have a girlfriend? Will there be a celebration of life? He's left a vacancy at the management level in HR. Any idea what it pays? And so on. After a time, the present moment returns, telephones ring, red tag dockets must be answered, and Michelle reminds us of our need to return to the tasks at hand. I'm sure there'll be some kind of funeral to attend, or some celebration of life at the department level, she said. I'll keep you posted. There was always a considerable volume of correspondence to attend to at the center, with over 57,000 affected, concerned, and angry homeowners seeking redress. The letters flowed in. Although computers were not yet commonplace, there was a system in place to recognize the similarity of many of the questions, complaints, and queries being thrown at our department, and to create a series of standardized replies to help streamline the process. Often, the job of a communications officer was simply reading a letter and fabricating a reply using these stock responses. Looks like an A3, a C5, a B7, and a C8 ought to do it, which would then be sent off for assembly and signatures by one of the department heads. More complex letters, those requiring technical information, detailed legal or political responses, would be handled individually and created by one of our info officers before making its way through the gauntlet of multi-level bureaucratic approval. These sensitive letters would often be massaged several times on their way up and down the chain of command, until, like a rare jewel, they were polished to glistening perfection. I was starting to wonder how I could become a drug mule in Stephanie's defunct drug smuggling ring. As I write this little story, the first line of bass player Stephen Wilcox's song, Oyster, jumps out at me, like a deer leaping from the bushes by the side of a winding country road on a dark, moonless night. Defeated by dreams, his vision of flight and space conquered. Orson saw a miracle in the stamp of his mother. Although my dreams may have suffered a defeat and my visions of flight and space lay temporarily vanquished by the three fates, I still had Steve, Ted, and the Simpletones. Sanity was maintained with late-night jam sessions at the Preston Lounge, lubricated by beer and London Dock rum, endless dinner parties with our eclectic group of friends, and all the carnal calisthenics that a young man in his 20s could wish for. Then, one fine day, a few weeks after Roger's passing, upon arrival at the Youth Center, Michelle called me into her office to let me know that Anne, our unit manager, had to leave suddenly the following morning for a week due to a family emergency, and to ask me if I could take over the role of manager in her absence. As one of the underlings, I'd certainly watched Anne at work since my arrival at the center, and felt, through my somewhat indifferent observations, that her job didn't appear terribly demanding. I thought, she seems to hand out correspondence that comes in, follows up on the flow of yellow and red dockets, answers a few questions, talks on the phone with her mom, and liaises with Michelle. No problem, Michelle. Piece of cake. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to take on this significant challenge, prove myself worthy, and draw attention to my superiors of my reliability and cool-headedness under pressure. Well, okay, maybe not the latter bit, but if you understand how bureaucracy works, you'll get the implied test that this mini promotion represented. I could tell almost immediately that some of my coworkers, who had been there longer than I, were slightly miffed, that they were overlooked for this climb up the next rung of responsibility. I experienced a completely unfamiliar sensation. I think it's called smugness. It was to be short-lived. Drinks are on me, chums, I said, as the boys gathered for after-work beverages at the Oak. Yay, came the group response. What's the occasion, George? Asked Adam. Just got a temporary promotion today to manager, so I'm feeling a little flush, I replied, gulping down some nice, cool Kilkenny. Wow, that was pretty quick. Jesus, you've only been there for like 6 or 7 months, continued Adam. The boys at External are going to be kicking themselves when they realize that they passed over such obvious talent, he said, laughing. Well, it's only for a week, I said, but once they see how efficiently I hand out those yellow and red dockets, I think I can expect a fairly quick rise through the ranks. Everyone laughed, and Andrew observed, Enjoy it while it lasts, lads. We all know how these things can play out. Heads nodded reflectively and glasses clinked. A toast to the manager, they all chimed in. Another round, please, Patty, I shouted. It was going to be one of those evenings. Stephanie was pleased that I'd received the positive news, less pleased that I staggered in drunk at 2 a.m. on a workday. My promise to take her up for a nice dinner on my winnings the following evening brought smiles and likely ate up whatever incremental monetary increase I was to receive for 1 week's promotion. Getting up hungover and late is never a great way to start any new job. But Stephanie said she had made an especially strong coffee to get my little legs pumping quickly on my bike ride over to Hull. Here's a triple Sumatran espresso, she said. Just ground this morning. This will get you there on time. I kissed her goodbye, jumped on my bike, and sped off, keeping a mind on my tight window of time. Look at that, I said to myself, heart racing and slightly out of breath. A few minutes before 9. That might be my best time ever. Rather than wait for the elevator, I sprinted up the 3 flights of stairs to our office on the 3rd floor, marched briskly down the hall, and entered the communications department to a series of nods, waves, and a chorus of good mornings and bonjours. I made my way to Anne's cubicle in the corner near the window. We worked in an open office layout with 4-foot movable baffles, allowing greater overall visibility, but limited privacy. I sat down at her desk, my home for the next week, while Anne was off in Bradford caring for her ailing mother, and surveyed the rather large pile of files, dockets, paperwork, and notes, hastily scribbled for my attention. Despite my hangover and lack of sleep, I thought to myself, man, that Sumatran is really working. I'm just buzzing. I should be able to breeze through these stacks of correspondence in no time. As the red dockets held more urgency, I turned my attention to those that were festooned with additional red stickies, applying greater need for care, consideration, and timeliness. Invariably, these were letters addressed to Judy Arola, the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, and came from families experiencing serious distress, possible Eufy-related cancer and bankruptcy, and sent to their Member of Parliament to try and create some political clout behind their request. As is so often the case within bureaucracies, once a program of assistance was in place, it was difficult, if not impossible, to go beyond the parameters of the program. So replies were often designed to placate and assure. We're coming, don't worry, help is on the way. As I sorted through the stacks of correspondence, dividing various dockets up to distribute to my coworkers, I came across an urgent piece from a family that were at their wits' end about how they're concerned for their children's health, living in a devalued home that they were now incapable of selling. It was a letter I'd replied to several days earlier on behalf of the minister, and it had made its way through multiple layers of bureaucratic editing, proofing, and approval before landing on Minister Arola's desk, where she noticed a punctuation error. A period was missing from the end of a sentence. She circled it on the onion-skinned paper and sent it all the way back down the chain of command to arrive back in my hands once again. I stared at the error with a mix of disbelief, mild annoyance, and the realization that this little seemingly insignificant mistake would likely cost the system, read taxpayer, extra money and time while the poor family struggled and waited. My coffee buzz was on max, and I felt my blood pressure rise slightly. Just then, Paul, one of my fellow coworkers, leaned over the partition and asked if I could help him solve a particularly difficult problem he was having with one of his dockets. I turned to reply when all of a sudden another coworker, Chantal, leaned over a different partition and said, Georges, je n'ai rien à faire, and distribue généralement la correspondance dès qu'elle arrive à 8h30. It means basically, I don't have anything to do. Anne usually gives us her stuff by 8:30. As I was deciphering Chantal's comment with my somewhat limited command of French, while realizing she was giving me a slight dig, pointing out that Anne normally arrived at 8:30 to hand up the day's workload, the phone rang. While Paul and Chantal leaned over the partitions waiting for a reply, and the phone continued to ring, I could feel my heart starting to race and my stress level rising.
Mm-hmm.
Before picking up the phone, I turned to Paul and Chantal and said, with a forced air of calm, I think it's Michelle. Can I get back to you both in about 15 minutes? And picked up the phone. It was Michelle, our department head. George, I need to see you in my office. Maybe it was the hangover and lack of sleep. Maybe it was the coffee. Maybe it was the heart-pumping bike ride at the start of my day. Maybe it was the triplex of demands and requests from coworkers and boss landing all at once. Whatever the reason, I was now in full deer-in-the-headlights mode. Good morning, Michelle, I said, trying to hide the slight tremble in my voice and the horrible, fearful feeling that I wasn't physically, mentally, or emotionally capable of seeing her right at that moment. I just have to take care of a couple of things. Can I come and see you in about a half an hour? Sure, see you then, she replied. I got up from my desk, loosened my tie, left our department, headed down the hall to the stairs, wandered down the 3 flights, found the front door of the building, left the building, and walked down the street to a little park about a block away that had benches, and sat down, shell-shocked. I'd never had a panic attack before. I wondered if, like Roger, I was having a heart attack. It was about 9:45 a.m., and there I was, sitting in a park, calming down but still slightly bewildered by what had just happened. Wow, I thought, what was that all about? I really don't know if I can go back up there. Maybe I'm not cut out to be a manager, or a writer, or an employee. I stared at the trees and the few people in the park, and then I noticed a dépanneur on the adjacent corner. It took a moment to dawn on me, but then I remembered that I was in Hull, in the much more liberal province of Quebec, where liquor was sold 7 days a week, all day long, even in little corner convenience stores. A beer. I needed a beer. Even the thought of it had a calming effect. I got up, crossed the street, and wandered into the little dépanneur. Peering through the foggy window of the beer cooler, I saw the shopkeeper kept a very well-stocked supply of beers, many of which weren't even available across the bridge in Ottawa. Different brands, sizes, I thought. He's got beers twice the size of the little brown stubbies I get back home. I pulled out one of the very large Labatt's 50s and asked, Combien coûte cette bière, monsieur? The proprietor looked up from his newspaper and replied, Le gros 50, $1.75. I gave him a $2 bill, asked him to crack it open for me, put it in a paper bag, and said, Gardez la monnaie. He smiled and nodded as I walked out with my stress antidote. Back on the bench in the park, I swilled my gros 50 from a brown paper bag and pondered my 2 futures. Itinerant, unemployable hobo, or functional cog in the machine. I felt the calming effects of the beer and a slow return to normal as this hair of the dog worked its magic. In short order, my stress level had subsided enough for a good inspirational pep talk. Snap out of it, asshole, and get back to work. You got this. I chugged the last dregs of beer for fortification, and because I liked beer, and headed back to my cubicle. I waved at Paul as I walked in, smiling, pointed to my watch, and gave him the sign for 5 more minutes. Poked my head in Michelle's doorway. Her elevated status gave her an office with a door, and told her that I just had to deal with a few staff issues such as assembling some work for Chantal before seeing her, and then plunked myself back at my desk to filter through files, dockets, assorted correspondence, and letters to hand out to my crew of 6 writers. While sorting through the stack, with workloads and overall urgency in mind, I came across the same file I was looking at when this whole imbroglio began. Ah, yes, I thought to myself, with wry humor, Judy Arola is missing her period. Rather than setting it off for a complete time-consuming and costly redo, I grabbed a sharp pencil, lifted the onion skin sheet, and placed a firm little period at the end of the offending typewritten sentence. I marked it approved and stuck it in the outbox to be sent without further delay to the distressed family in waiting. There, you're off the hook, I'm done.